All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining today. We wanted to come in and talk to you about the IMAGINiT Pulse product, which is a relatively new product for us still. It's been out for a couple years now, but we know that there's a few things that are that people haven't seen the IMAGINiT Pulse product, as well as there's some new things that we're doing with Pulse that we wanted to talk about. So we wanted to go through and talk about what it is and why it is and what's new and that kind of thing. So we recently did a survey along with Autodesk about customers that were implementing the Autodesk Fusion Lifecycle product. That's the PLM product. And what came back from that was that the average knowledge worker was spending about 50% of their time on these product-related sort of processes, but of that time, 70% of it was really, things that had to get done, but not clearly designed, not clearly, things that couldn't be automated if companies were to invest in automating some of their practices about how data gets moved, data gets entered, all of those kinds of things. And so, as we looked at this and as we looked at, how complicated some of the different products are getting and how the data needs to flow between systems, we felt, this was sort of one of the things that pushed us into trying to productize a little bit of our system integration expertise. So Pulse is a platform that's really focused on doing system integration, but specifically around engineering products. In IMAGINiT, really going back, 25 years. I mean, I think actually even closer to 30. We've been doing system integration kinds of projects, and they've mostly been on a custom basis. These are a few of the kinds of things that we've done a lot of over the years, but these have all been relatively custom jobs. They got the job done, but there was limited ability for us to reuse things. There was really limited investment in sort of polishing the tools and making the actual integration processes really top-notch and repeatable and traceable, because each one was sort of funded individually by an individual customer. And as we started to see more people integrating cloud-based solutions, that was a little bit more challenging. Not so much the integrating to the cloud, but having cloud services being able to send data back to on-premise kinds of systems. All of these kinds of things, as we looked at them all together, really spoke to a need to have more of a platform where we could invest in the platform, invest in the fundamentals, and then start building more of our system integration projects that we do on top of that platform. And the concept of Pulse was that we really just need to have these connectors to be able to plug in the API from different products and be able to mix those two things together and map how the data flows from one to the other or how it flows back. But ultimately, the more pieces of this puzzle that we can make out of the box, that kind of shrinks the amount of custom work or configuration work that needs to be done for each system integration kind of project that needs to be worked on. Ultimately, lowering the amount of effort and lowering the amount of risk involved in doing this system integration kinds of projects. Our target has been, in cases where we've done, system A to system B integration before, that the next time we do it for the next customer, that really 85% of it is all packaged or reusable, and the last 15% is really the kinds of things that you always have to do in a systems integration discussion, trying to understand the specifics of how each customer uses the tools and how the data maps back and forth. So, for example, our first one that we developed was something that integrated from Autodesk Vault on one side, which is an on-premise product, to Autodesk Fusion Lifecycle, which is a cloud-based PLM tool. So that was what helped us build out a lot of these concepts. And as an example of what's it like to work on a project that's using Pulse as the platform, it really comes down into some fairly easy to understand concepts. You've got the two different systems on different sides. You've got different what we call workflow sequences, where you describe data or a process that's moving data from one side to the other, or a process that's moving data from the other side back to the original side. Different things that could trigger it, that sort of thing. Step two is, what are the triggers? How do we say now it's time to send things? And that depends a little bit on what the different connector has within something like the Pulse Vault connector. There are triggers that can be set up on Vault lifecycle transitions to say what should be sent and when the transition should be automatically triggered. In the case of Fusion Lifecycle, that's a cloud-based product, but there are ways that we can tie into the engineering release process or have different cloud scripts that run and kick off the different workflow sequences. And then within a particular workflow sequence, like this one is sending the Vault file to Fusion Lifecycle, we break this down into individual scripts. So these are little C# scriptlets that run inside of the Pulse cloud environment, where you have control over exactly what the fields are that are being mapped back and forth, as well as any kind of if-then logic or anything that that controls how exactly you want to map that data across. So this is our goal, to separate things into pieces to make them understandable, and ultimately we still try to make these scripts as simple as reasonably possible, so that the scripting is sort of minimized and our connectors do the heavy lifting. But ultimately, this is where a lot of the details of how your company chooses to bring data across and map it into different situations. So let's take a look at what this looks like to have something like Vault or Fusion Lifecycle or an ERP system integrated together with Pulse. And I'm going to turn it over to Tim Strandberg, who can give us a demo of this piece of it.
Thank you, Matt. I'll display a demo here. Actually, it's a recorded demo that we did at AU this past year. This is going to demonstrate Vault Professional going to Fusion Lifecycle. We're going to transfer items from Vault, essentially files from Vault, create items in Fusion Lifecycle, and then we're going to go ahead and push those to an ERP system. Our ERP of choice today is NetSuite. And then finally, we're going to show a round trip of things coming back from NetSuite back to Fusion Lifecycle. So here we've got our items in Fusion Lifecycle and our files in Vault. Here you can see we've got user-defined properties associated to that file. We'll go ahead and change the state, file state, from work in progress to for review. Now Pulse is gathering all of the bill of material information, everything it takes to make up that clamp assembly, including any viewable files, any IDWs, any PDFs, any drawings that we have dictated that should go along with that file to be attachments on the Fusion Lifecycle item. And we can see here that, of course, then Vault has switched the lifecycle to for review. If we jump over to Pulse for just a minute, this is the cloud side of things, and refresh the view. We can see there that it's processing that clamp assembly. And when that sequence completes, Matt talked about those sequence of events. Now we can refresh the view in Fusion Lifecycle, and now we can see our new parts that have been, or our new items that have been created in Fusion Lifecycle. As I mentioned, the bill of materials, as defined in that inventor model, comes straight across. They all have attachments. We'll take a peek at those attachments. Typically, these are your viewables from Vault. We've chosen to also bring in the PDF, so there's just a basic drawing of that hold-down clamp. And I might pause here for just a second. We've chosen to control change of our Vault items using Fusion Lifecycle. So our ECO process is in Fusion Lifecycle rather than Vault. And that allows, one, exposure to a greater audience. Not everybody has to have a Vault license to be able to view and review that change process. So we will see Fusion Lifecycle actually controlling those Vault files and their file states as well as their revisions. So we enter a title for the change order, give it a reason code that it's our initial release, and finally we choose a routing team. Since this is our initial release, we just chose a simple routing. So we have to set the lifecycle state that it's intended to go to in Fusion Lifecycle, and there we can see our assembly. Since we just included the assembly on the change order, we need to go ahead and add all of its children so it's all released at once. And then we need to go and set the life cycle for all of them. So now we can see that they're all going from an initial work in progress, they're all going to be released to Rev A. So then we transition our workflow. Here again, I'll pause just briefly, just to mention that, this is more or less an out-of-the-box workflow that Autodesk has provided with this Fusion Lifecycle tenant. This happens to be one of my demo tenants. The workflow can essentially be configured to be anything that meets your company requirements. As I mentioned, we're taking the simple release process, so we can see that only that transition where the cursor is right now or the cancel transition is available. Had I chosen to run it through a full CCB review process through a larger routing team, then the submit CCB path, transition path, would have been available up here. So we're going to go ahead and move that on with our final approval. So this really is what triggers Pulse. It initiates another one of those sequences. I'll refresh this screen and we'll see that sequence at the top. And refresh Vault. And now we can see that Pulse has set all of those lifecycle states, those file states for review to released. It has captured the current revision of Rev A. And we also use the unique identifier within Fusion Lifecycle to keep things in sync back and forth to Vault. So to go on to ERP, we have to set the item type. Now this is perhaps a different persona performing these actions. This may be one of the ERP team that decides. It may be someone else on the engineering team. And I actually wrote a little script in Fusion Lifecycle so that it can go through the list of affected items and figure out what those item types are supposed to be, just to save some steps. So now we can see that they're all set to inventory item with the exception of our top level assembly. And now we progress the workflow to push those items over to ERP. So just like we created the items in Fusion Lifecycle for the first time, this is creating the items in the ERP system for the first time. Again, we can see that sequence processing. There's the name of our sequence. Refresh again, and it's done. So now if we jump over to NetSuite, if we search for that part number, we can see there are all of our parts. There's our assembly. Again, I'll pause here just a second. Notice that we've pulled in that same property values that originated in Vault. So the engineer entered them once in Vault. They were reused in Fusion Lifecycle, and here they're reused again in NetSuite. And if we take a look at the manufacturing tab, here we can see there's our bill of materials. There's all of our items that were created and associated to this top-level assembly. If we open one of those items in NetSuite, we can see that we've also created a link back to the Fusion Lifecycle item. So we've got a bidirectional link between the two systems, so it allows the NetSuite user to quickly navigate over to Fusion Lifecycle, and likewise, the Fusion Lifecycle user can quickly navigate to that NetSuite item. Again, really reduces the amount of time that people need to search for the pertinent data. Here we can see that the vendor that we had specified in Vault, a company by the name of Strandco. And if I search for Strandco, we can see, yep, we have it associated, but there is no such vendor. It doesn't list a vendor item within Fusion Lifecycle, or excuse me, within NetSuite. We take a look over here back in Fusion Lifecycle and go to the suppliers workspace. We can see that we have no suppliers. So we're going to go ahead and create a new vendor. And this workflow really all depends on who owns which data. In this case, the vendor is owned by the ERP system. Parts and models are owned by Vault. The item master is maintained in Fusion Lifecycle. So there we've successfully created a new vendor in Fusion Lifecycle, and we can see that that sequence has fired within Pulse. I don't know why we paused there. So again, I entered address information, all the metadata associated to this vendor. So we got confirmation that the record was successfully created in NetSuite. And now we can see that the sequence is also fired within Pulse. And if we go back here to Fusion Lifecycle and refresh the screen, now we can see that we have one new supplier. And there's all the metadata that I associate or that I created entered in NetSuite. It's brought back over to Fusion Lifecycle, completing the cycle. And I will pass the ball back to Mr. Mason.
All right, thanks, Tim. So sort of reviewing what we've seen. The Pulse product is a software as a service based platform that sits in the middle there and has all of the various pieces being able to talk to each other, and all of the ultimate sort of mapping of what data goes into what field in the other system is all done in that centralized location. We have, we started out with these 4 different endpoint connectors. We actually have a few more that we've kind of put out there as beta standard. That includes the NetSuite ERP, a BIM 360 Docs connector, and then the ability to have your own custom connector. Those are all out there and available on some basis. And there's a couple other projects I mentioned in one of the Q&As that came in. Someone asked about SAP. That's something where we have a project kicking off there. Our endpoint for SAP, I expect that that'll be a little time before we would even declare that to be a beta endpoint. We like to do the first couple of integrations, without sort of promoting our endpoint as being ready for anyone who comes along and says, I want to integrate this with SAP or anything else. So the endpoints that we develop, they kind of graduate from custom, and then eventually they'll be called beta, and then when they get to this level, then they'll be called something. The beta tag will be removed from them. So, but these are the ones that we're confident about talking about publicly and that kind of thing. So in terms of what Pulse is good for, I mean, we're not saying that Pulse is the right solution for every system integration project. We picture it as really particularly good if you're doing cloud-to-cloud integration or if you're doing on-premise to cloud. But if you're doing something that's really on-premise to on-premise integration, it just seems strange that to go up and through the cloud and then back to the same on-premise kind of location. Not that we couldn't, it just doesn't strike me as a great usage of the tool. But yeah, these fundamentally cloud to cloud or on-premise to cloud is really our the area that we think we make the most sense. In terms of some more technical details for Pulse, Pulse uses REST web services and queuing for all the tasks. As I mentioned, it's little C# scripts that do the actual mapping of field data into other fields. Really basic kind of C# stuff. We try to keep it relatively simple. All our data that is going through Pulse is all what's called encrypted at rest. So anything that's not actively being worked on, anything that's stored temporarily or anything else is all encrypted, and every tenant has isolated data from everyone else. It all runs in the Microsoft Azure cloud. Let's see, so flipping over, and then on the on-premise side of things, there's also client plugins. So, for example, inside of Vault, we have a plugin UI where you can configure how the Vault integration works. On the server side, like such as Fusion Lifecycle, there isn't really a user interface plugin. That's more done by scripting and just providing the tools to integrate on the server side. Just to give you a quick look at it. So here is our here's the Pulse environment right now. We have the various requests that have been flowing through the system. We have sequences that are those list of multiple scripts that are put together. For example, this particular Fusion Lifecycle ECO going to NetSuite items is these scripts put together. And then if we go in and look at a particular script, if I look at how do we do the mapping of Fusion Lifecycle items to, or actually let me do Vault to Fusion Lifecycle items. So we can see, this is a basic C# script. It really just mostly does something for every item in the bill of material. It goes through and makes the Fusion Lifecycle item and fills in all of the properties matched up with the Vault properties. And most of this C# scripting is just done here right in the web environment. But we do have some features that are handy, like sort of an IntelliSense kind of feature where you can look at what the properties are and what fields are available within different APIs. So flipping back. In summary, and we'll move on to Q&A in just a minute, but these are, I want to stress that these are still always custom integration projects. Our goal was really just to see how much we could make it not custom, but we're never going to get to 100%. We want to make as much of it out of the box, as much of it polished and reusable as possible, and ultimately, by doing that, it's going to make doing system integration projects with Pulse sort of more predictable, more cost-effective, less risk because we're leveraging things that we've used over and over again. And some people have asked, like, well, then, how would you compare yourself to a Jitterbit or a Dell Boomi or any of the other sort of monster players within the system integration space? I think our answer to that is really that we have a fairly narrow focus on engineering document management. That's our real strong suite in terms of knowledge, document management and PLM, and then the other tools out there that we have to integrate to, like an SAP or other ERP systems, are not exactly our strong suite, but we can, because I think we specialize in the engineering side view of that, we've just got some specialized expertise in that side of things. So if you were to, say I want to do a Salesforce to Magento kind of integration, Pulse can do it. It's not necessarily anything that's leveraging our real strengths, which is engineering, document management, and PLM.